Well, I think the concern for simplicity in my life is one of my oldest concerns. As a matter of fact, I think my whole adult life, I have been concerned with the issue of simplicity because it has a lot to do with uncluttering. Our lives are so cluttered up in the West with activities, with things, with books, with encounters, with traveling here and there, 1,001 things. Everybody understands what I'm speaking about. And I think it's difficult to tread the spiritual path if you don't simplify your life down to a few essentials. You cannot have 50,000 activities and pursue the spiritual path. At least I don't think it is possible. And I wrote the first 2 books published in Europe in French on simple living 20 years ago, when it wasn't a concern for anyone. Now it's just beginning to become a concern for a certain number of people. And so with the uncluttering of your life, you have more space for blessing. But at the same time, if you do a lot of blessing, you will automatically want to unclutter your life, because it will become so clear to you that all this clutter we have is just such an impediment to our true spiritual growth. And I think there are privileged experiences that enable you to understand that sooner or later you must put first things first in your life. And I'd like to share here what was probably the most powerful spiritual experience of my whole life. No, not probably, certainly the most powerful experience in my whole life, and on which my whole spiritual outlook is based. I was in Africa. This was over 20 years ago, and I was attending the meeting, the General Assembly of this peasant farmer organization, of which I was one of the founding members. And the last day of our meetings, which were held in a city called Hoyguya in Burkina Faso, I caught dysentery. Now, at the beginning, it's nothing serious, but it's a bother because you have to run a great deal to the toilet. And I did my spiritual work. I didn't take any pills because at that time I handled all my health issues spiritually. And I thought it had disappeared. At least it disappeared at the end of the afternoon. I went out for dinner with an African friend. And the next day, going to the airport, it started all over again. And on the airplane back to Paris, I was traveling with my spiritual texts, my readings, my prayers, my mantras, my affirmations, all the things I usually did to try and overcome any health issue. And I was sitting next to an unaccompanied young boy. And the stewardess taking care of this little boy was so kind with him. She'd constantly come and check that he was okay. And one moment she came and addressed him with a special tenderness. And suddenly, I felt this most incredible gratitude for this woman. It was a cosmic gratitude that overwhelmed me. And suddenly, I was projected into a space outside the plane, outside of time, where the only thing present was infinite love. The only feeling I had was that of this incredible love, a love which was the cause, the effect, the source the only power, the only presence, the only activity in the universe was this extraordinary, extraordinary love. But the most amazing thing of the whole experience is that Pierre Pradervand had totally disappeared. I had no consciousness whatsoever of existing as a Swiss citizen with an ego or whatever. My only consciousness was, for a certain while, I don't know how long because I was outside of time, my only consciousness was the divine consciousness. An American 19th century thinker and metaphysician, Mary Baker Eddy, once stated, "The divine understanding reigns, is all, and there is no other consciousness." Well, that's exactly what I experienced at that moment on the plane. The divine consciousness was my consciousness. And of course, it was the most incredible feeling of freedom. The only time I've felt radical freedom in my life, because my ego had simply and totally disappeared. And suddenly, I was back in the plane. I felt something adjusting in my bowels, and in a matter of seconds, I was freed of the dysentery. But the real healing wasn't the physical healing. The real healing was my vision of life, of the world, of the universe. And that has stayed as the foundation stone of my spiritual striving. I think we are all called to this state where our only thought will be love. And of course, I'm still very much barely in the kindergarten of this practice. But I think it is for me today, I see this as the ultimate state I need to aim for on the spiritual path. And so blessing is just one expression of this universal love, but at the same time, by practicing blessing, you learn to grow a great deal in love, especially in non-judgment. And I'd like to stress that. It's impossible, as the text on blessing says, it's impossible to love, to bless, and to judge at the same time. It's impossible to bless and to judge. Try it, it's impossible. And the more you bless, the less you will judge. I think one of the most precious insights I've had in past years is that every single person, that includes President Assad of Syria and well-known gangsters of all sorts, everyone is at each moment at their highest level of consciousness. And when you have really understood this, you cannot feel resentment or anger with anyone. Joel Goldsmith, that remarkable American mystic of the last century, who created a teaching called the Infinite Way. Joel says, "No one can come into my consciousness who needs to be forgiven, because I have already forgiven him 70 times 7. And I feel that's what I felt towards the gentleman who tricked me with internet, you know, when I started our conversation. I realized so clearly that was his highest level of consciousness. So I can't resent him for being at his highest level of consciousness. If he could have been elsewhere, he would have been. And to understand this is a wonderful, wonderful tool for overcoming resentment in any form. So, that's my small wisdom on the topic.